Okay, this is when things get a little bit strange. Only because I decided today, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go over times when teams lost a 3-1 series lead because it's kind of fun, and I'm only going to cover series that I watched. And by watched, I mean some of them I watched intently and some of them I didn't because maybe a team I was watching, maybe a team that I liked better was playing, or a team I hated more was playing and I wanted to watch what they did. But let's go over how these series turned out because we've got a number of 3-1 series leads and we're all ready to just throw things away. But Philly and Colorado's kept things going. So in honor of them, let's take a look at this. Toronto blew a 3-1 series lead against Detroit. Detroit at home ice. So Toronto wins the first two in Detroit. Detroit wins the next one in Toronto. Toronto wins the next one at home. 3-2 in overtime, and Toronto rejoiced in 1987 until Detroit, led by Stevie Yzerman, 3-0 shutout, 4-2 win, and a 3-0 shutout in Game 7 at home. So in the last 6 periods in Detroit, no goals for Toronto. And that was after a 7-2 win in Game 2. So these big lopsided wins don't necessarily equal a series victory. 1987 as well. The New York Islanders, Washington Capitals, and the Capitals are a theme in this one, so I'll probably be talking about them a lot. Washington wins Game 1 4-3. The Islanders win Game 2 3-1, so they get a split in Washington. Washington wins both games in New York 2-0 and 4-1. The Islanders then won in Washington 4-2. The Islanders won at home 5-4, forcing a Game 7, and that's where I remember being really nervous. I was a Caps fan that spring, and because I like Bob Mason. And in 4 overtimes, the Islanders won it 3-2. Yeah, 4 overtimes. 4. And I watched all 4 overtimes, and I remember watching it on a little TV in my parents' room and just how excited I was to watch this game. And then the Islanders scored in that 4th overtime, and my heart sank. That was the first time I'd watched an overtime game where I was so into it, and then it just... The shot from the point and just Mason's reaction was just... everybody felt that in that moment. 1988, Washington gets some measure of revenge against Philly. Philly wins the first game 4-2 in Washington, so that win in the first game on the road is important. Washington wins the next game at home 5-4. Philly held serve at home 4-3 and 5-4 in overtime. Washington then wins at home 5-2 to force a Game 6. Wins Game 6 7-2. And then in Game 7, they won 5-4 in overtime over the Flyers. So overtime is not always a heartache for Washington, just normally is heartache for Washington. 1989, the LA Kings, who had home ice, came back and beat the Oilers. This was a big series because, of course, this is Wayne Gretzky when he was playing against the Edmonton Oilers, first time that had happened. Edmonton won the first game 4-3 in LA. LA wins the next game 5-2. Edmonton held serve at home 4-0 and 4-3. Going back to LA for Game 5. Game 5 is won by LA 4-2. LA wins on the road 4-1, and then they won Game 7 6-3. And I remember being kind of happy in 1989 to see the Kings knock out the Oilers, because at that point I was tired of seeing the Oilers win all the time and win everything, so I was happy to see it. But then LA went on to the next round and lost to Calgary. So 1990. The Oilers came back against the Jets. Now, I don't have an old Jets logo, so I had to use the current Jets logo. I hope that doesn't bother anybody. Winnipeg won Game 1 7-5 in Edmonton. Edmonton wins the next one at home 3-2 in overtime, and that was kind of a tipping point. If Winnipeg wins that one in overtime, I'm not doing this video with them in it, because Winnipeg won at home 2-1 and then 4-3 in double overtime, and I remember being excited as a Jets fan at the time. Again, anybody but Edmonton was kind of my thought at the time. Edmonton wins 4-3 in Game 5. They win 4-3 in Game 6. And then at home they win 4-1 in Game 7. While I sat there watching TV and going, yeah, of course it's Edmonton. Because of course it's Edmonton. Of course it is. 1991, St. Louis came back from 3-1 down against Detroit. Detroit wins Game 1 on the road 6-3. St. Louis wins Game 2 at home 4-2. Detroit holds serve at home. You'll notice this is kind of the ongoing theme. Detroit wins 5-2 and 4-3 at home. St. Louis then goes home and wins 6-1. They win Game 6 on the road 3-0. and then they went at home 3-2 to advance to the next round. 1992, Vancouver did it to Winnipeg. Winnipeg won game 1 in Vancouver 3-2. Vancouver then wins game 2 3-2. Winnipeg holds serve at home. 4-2 win, 3-1 win, and they're on their way. No. I remember Vancouver being down 3-1, and what I remember was I wasn't nervous about it. Vancouver wins game 5 8-2. They win game 6 8-3. They win game 7 5-0. So it was a 7-game series, yes, but it was over after game 5, really, because Vancouver woke up. This was Bure's rookie year. This was when they had Courtnall and Ronning and Linden and all these guys at the top of their game, and it was just, it was a slaughter after game 4. 1992, the Capitals show up on the board again. They had home ice again, and they lost it again against Pittsburgh, which should be a surprise to nobody watching this video. Washington wins game 1 at home 3-1. They win game 2 at home 6-2. They win both games at home. Good job. Pittsburgh wins the next game at home 6-4. Washington wins game 4 7-2. And I remember watching that 1992 and thinking, okay, so Capitals, all right. Capitals, this will be all right, because I'm pretty sure it was the Bruins that were waiting for an opponent from this matchup. I don't remember if this was round 1 or round 2. Anyways, in game 5, Pittsburgh wins on the road 5-2. Pittsburgh then won at home 6-4, and then they won game 7 on the road. Washington loses game 7 at home to Pittsburgh 3-1. Yeah. 1994, Vancouver. This was one of the greatest series I've ever watched in my life. I know Calgary fans are going to disagree with me on this one, but for me, it's one of the greatest series I've ever watched in my life. Vancouver wins game 1 5-0. Do you know what I said when they won 5-0? I said, good, they don't get swept. That's all I said. That they don't get swept. I don't have to worry about Vancouver having a goose egg next to them at the end of the series. I had no idea what was coming. Calgary wins the next game 7-5. Again, I was like, all right, well, Vancouver had a decent game. They lose, but they had 5 goals. This is all right. Calgary wins 4-2. Calgary wins 3-2. And I'm like, all right, well, we lost both games at home, so we're done. Game 5, I watched this game because since we were down 3-1, I didn't feel any pressure. There was no pressure on the Canucks. I was like, all right, well, this is the end of the season, so let's just see how it turns out. They win 2-1 in overtime in Calgary. And then at home in Game 6, they win 3-2 in overtime. Game 7, the big game in Calgary, they win 4-3 in double overtime. And I remember watching it again on a small TV and at my friend's house. We were just in his room watching double overtime. We actually weren't bothering to watch the game. We were playing, I don't remember which video game we were playing. I think we were playing Donkey Kong Country. I don't remember. I know we were like, well, the Canucks are going to lose tonight in Calgary, and we feel really good about the series being 3-3. Let's just leave it at that. And then it went to overtime. We're like, you know what? Yeah, it's overtime game 7. Let's go ahead, throw the game on. And when they scored and they won that one in double overtime, him and I went absolutely crazy. We went nuts. It was a great moment, and I remember his parents upstairs going nuts as well. It was one of those moments that I don't forget. And that was 24 years ago. 1995, Pittsburgh came back against, what's that? Yeah, Washington. Washington wins game 1 in Pittsburgh 5-4. Pittsburgh wins game 2 5-3. Washington holds serve at home 6-2 and 6-2. And I remember watching this series in 95 and being like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And then this game 5 I watched at my dad's apartment. Pittsburgh wins at 6-5 in overtime. And I was so angry. And I remember my dad saying, well, they're still up 3-2. They're still going to take out Pittsburgh. And I'm like, Dad, it's Washington. I've been watching them since 1987. This is 8 years. I've already watched them blow 2 3-1 series leads, and I said they're done. Pittsburgh wins game 6 at home, or in Washington, 7-1, and then they win at home 3-0. So I was sadly right. I hate being right about those ones. I really do, because I didn't like Pittsburgh back then. Back then, I didn't like the Penguins, because I didn't like Mario. 1998, the Edmonton Oilers actually made me cheer for them against Colorado, which was weird, but I felt okay with it. I think they lost to Dallas in the next round, though. Anyways, Edmonton wins game 1 in Colorado 3-2. Colorado wins 5-2 to get the split at home, and then they win both games in Edmonton. 5-4 in overtime, 3-1 in game 4. Game 5, Edmonton wins 3-1 in Colorado. They win 2-0 at home and then 4-0 on the road. So back-to-back shutouts in 1998 to get the win against the Colorado Avalanche, a team that by all rights was a powerhouse in the NHL. 1999, St. Louis came back from 3-1 down against Phoenix. I keep wanting to say Arizona. I've got you saying Arizona, but in this case, they were the Phoenix Coyotes. St. Louis wins game 1, 3-1. Phoenix wins game 2 to hold serve at home, kind of like the 1-1 split they get. 4-3 in overtime. Phoenix then went to St. Louis and won both games on the road in games 3 and 4. 5-4 and 2-1. They go home. St. Louis wins game 5 in overtime, 2-1. They win game 6 at home, 5-3. And then, heartbreaking for Phoenix fans, St. Louis wins game 7, 1-0 in overtime. Sometimes I talk so fast to get ahead of myself. 1-0 win for the St. Louis Blues over the Phoenix Coyotes. 2000. And this is a major series for Devils fans, of course. Devils fans will love me talking about this one. New Jersey wins 4-1 in game 1 on the road. Philly wins game 4-3 at home to split it. Then they go to New Jersey and win both, 4-2 and 3-1. New Jersey then goes on the road and they win to extend the series with a 4-1 win. New Jersey then wins at home 2-1, and then New Jersey won 2-1 on the road. New Jersey was kind of a nemesis for Eric Lindros. Caused the Legion of Doom line endless frustration. And I remember that series for the fact that, yeah, Marty Brodeur allowed 3 goals in 3 games for the rest of that series, and the Devils just didn't really give Philly anything to work with. The neutral zone trap wasn't used as much in 2000 for them as it was in 95, but it was still there. It was still a big part of their game, and it was still very frustrating for teams who played against them. 2003, the Vancouver Canucks come back against St. Louis. St. Louis wins game 1, 6-0. I was not impressed with that game. Vancouver wins game 2, 2-1. St. Louis then won both home games, 3-1 and 4-1. Game 5, Vancouver wins 5-3. And I remember in that game, Chris Pronger started looking over his shoulder when he had the puck. Todd Bertuzzi had been running him over every single game. And it started to wear down that Blues defense in game 5. And Vancouver looked like they could get past them. And I started to say, you know what? I think Vancouver's coming back and winning this one. Vancouver 4-3 winners in game 6 on the road. And then they came home and won it 4-1 at home. And that game, game 7 at home, it was fantastic. It was so much fun. And nothing could ruin that feeling. Hold on to that thought. 2003 as well. So at the same time, the Minnesota Wild came back and beat Colorado. I was really happy. I was like, I don't want to play Colorado in the second round. This is great. Minnesota wins 4-2 in game 1 on the road. Colorado wins game 2 at home, 3-2. They then win both games on the road, 3-0 and 3-1. So they go home with a chance to wrap it up. Minnesota wins 3-2. Minnesota goes home, wins the next game 3-2 in overtime. And then Minnesota went on the road and won in overtime 3-2 over Colorado. And knocking out the Avalanche was this huge upset. So it set up Vancouver and Minnesota. What could go wrong? Let's talk about what went wrong. 2003, still, Vancouver wins game 1 in overtime 4-3. Made me nervous. Minnesota wins game 2, 3-2. I'm still nervous. Vancouver wins game 3, 3-2 in Minnesota. And they win game 4, 3-2 in Minnesota. And I remember cheering when they scored against Minnesota because they didn't really deserve that game. And I know there's going to be Canuck fans who say, wait, what? No, Minnesota should rightfully have won that game. And I felt like, okay, Vancouver stole one. This is big. Now they're coming home with a 3-1 series lead, and we can move on to Anaheim. No. Minnesota came in and spanked Vancouver at home 7-2. I was really angry at the end of that game. And again, it's frustrating to see your team lose 2-1 or 3-2 or overtime. But when your team doesn't show up for a game where they can clinch a series, it is really, really maddening. And then they went to Minnesota and laid an egg there. Minnesota wins that one 5-1. And at that point coming home, I'm like, yeah, Minnesota's got this series. This is all Minnesota series. It's done. And Minnesota won on the road 4-2. 2004. For people who say, well, you shouldn't be nervous about the Bruins against the Leafs. I know I shouldn't be, but 2004, I hated Montreal. And I hated them more coming out of this. Boston wins 3-0 at home. They win 2-1 at home in overtime in Game 2. They're up 2-0 going to Montreal, and I'm like, all right, we're in good shape. They lose Game 3 in Montreal 3-2, but they win Game 4 4-3 in double overtime, and I remember jumping out of my seat. I was so excited. I was like, this is great. We're going to take out Montreal. Then Montreal won Game 5 and Boston 5-1. Remember how I said I got mad at Vancouver for their Game 5? Yeah, same for Boston with that 5-1 loss. Then Montreal wins at home 5-2. And then, funny, Montreal wins 2-0 in Game 7 in Boston, which was really angering. So up until Game 5, everything looked good. And then as soon as Game 5 hit, it just all went to crap. 2009, hey, look, the Caps are back on the board. But this time they won. They came back and they beat the New York Rangers. The Rangers show up on the board for the first time. This won't be the last. The Rangers won Game 1 on the road 4-3. They won Game 2 on the road 1-0. Washington then wins on the road 4-0. So much like the Columbus-Washington series of this year so far. The Rangers then won at home 2-1, going to Washington with a chance to wrap it up. Washington wins at home 4-0. They went on the road 5-3. And they went at home 2-1. No overtime needed in that series whatsoever. The Washington Capitals coming out with the win. 2010. Montreal. Yeah, Montreal did it again. I really don't like Montreal. But this series was fun for me. Because at this point, I was in full I can't stand Ovechkin mode. And I at this point had decided that I didn't trust the Capitals at all. Because I was tired of seeing them lose later. So I wanted them to lose earlier. Montreal wins on the road 3-2 in overtime. Washington wins 6-5 in overtime in Game 2. Washington wins Game 3 5-1 in Montreal. They win Game 4 6-3 in Montreal. They go home with a lead 3-1. This series is theirs. Jaro Halak said, "Not today." Game 5 Montreal wins 2-1. Game 6 Montreal wins 4-1. Game 7 Montreal wins 2-1. 3 goals against in the last 3 games. Jaro Halak was a beast in that series. And when Montreal traded Halak after that playoff run was over and went with Carey Price, there was a lot of people, myself included, that thought they were crazy. Because Jaro Halak looked fantastic in that series and then the one after, too. 2010. Oh, why does Shannon have any nerves about Boston? He's crazy. Yeah, 2010. Boston wins 5-4 in overtime over the Flyers. They win 3-2 over the Flyers. They then go into Philly in Game 3 and they win 4-1. Everything's awesome. Game 4, I watched Game 4. They lost in overtime 5-4. And there was just something in that game that I remember going to work and saying, I think Boston's going to lose this. People said, are you crazy? And this is where people saying it now too, like, you're insane. How can you, what? You're so used to your team failing that they're not going to fail. They're going to knock out Philly. Philly won Game 5 in Boston 4-0. And I was beside myself with anger. Game 6, Philly wins at home 2-1. And at this point, I was like, and we blow it. We're going to be the first team that's blown a 3-0 series lead. All of these series were 3-1 up until here. First team since 1826, when the Titanic sank. Like, I'm kidding on both of those, but it feels like it. It feels like the Toronto-Detroit thing from back in the 40s might as well have been in the 1800s. And yeah, it was frustrating because Boston's up 3-0. Okay, so I'm at work that day because it was a matinee game, so I missed it. And this one guy from work comes up to me and, hey, Boston's up 3-0. Looks like they avoided that coming back from 3-0 thing. And I was like, oh, okay, good. What period's in? He said second period. I'm like, all right, well, they should be able to hold a 3-goal lead with period and a half left. No. They lost 4-3. And when they lost, that same person came down laughing and said, yeah, no, the Bruins lost 4-3. And my heart just dropped. I'm really glad I didn't watch that game because I might still be against hockey and this channel might not exist. 2011, Tampa came back and did it to the Penguins. somebody did it to the Penguins after I watched Pittsburgh do it to Washington twice. Pittsburgh wins game 1 at home 3-0. Tampa Bay wins 5-1 on the road, and then Pittsburgh went to Tampa and won both 3-2 in game 3, 3-2 in double overtime in game 4. Everything's great. No. Game 5 in Pittsburgh, Tampa won 8-2, and I still remember the dancing I did with that score. Game 6 in Tampa, they went 4-2, and then Game 7, and this would kind of foreshadow what would happen after against Boston. Tampa wins 1-0. In that same playoff run, they played Boston, and for people who are saying, "Oh well, you don't have to worry about Boston," the white knuckle ride I had with them against Tampa. Game 7, Tampa's power play had been fantastic. I was mad at Claude Julien for the way he was deploying Tyler Seguin or not deploying him, and all I kept thinking was, as soon as Tampa's power play gets going in this Game 7, we're screwed. Tampa never got a power play. There were no power plays in the game, and Tampa fans everywhere believed there was a conspiracy. I'm sure there's still Tampa fans that will mention in the comment section below about said conspiracy, which never surfaced again. And because Gregory Campbell, his dad's Colin Campbell, who works in the league office, so clearly the NHL was rigging it for Gregory Campbell, which never happened before or after, but that one year they wanted him to have it. I'm not saying that as fact either. I'm saying it because that's what I always heard. And so Tampa winning that one 1-0 was foreshadowing of them losing a Game 7 1-0 against Boston. But it was not a 3-1 comeback, so it's not on the board. 2013, so we're getting into the really recent, for those of you teens in the group who will remember. Chicago came back against Detroit, and this was one of those few series where I was cheering for Detroit. Chicago wins 4-1 in Game 1. Detroit then wins Game 2 4-1, and then they held serve at home 3-1 and 2-0 before going into Chicago and losing 4-1. So it's like, okay, as long as they win at home, but Chicago won in Detroit 4-3, and then overtime and the heartbreak of Chicago winning 2-1. And it was heartbreak. 2014, LA and San Jose. This is a infamous / famous, depending on which side of the fence you're on this one. The San Jose Sharks had a 3-0 series lead and home ice advantage. San Jose 6-3 in Game 1, 7-2 in Game 2. Game 3 they won in LA 4-3 in overtime, and this was a laugher. I remember watching this series and just laughing at what was going on with LA. I was like, these guys are so screwed. This series is so lopsided, and Jonathan Quick can't stop a beach ball, and this is just absolutely hilarious. You want to look at Jonathan Quick and how his 2014 goaltending stats weren't as good as 2012. This series just killed him. Game 4, LA wins 6-3 at home. All right. But then LA got a shutout in Game 5, 3-0. Game 6, LA wins at home 4-1. And then somehow, some way, they went into San Jose and won 5-1 in Game 7. So that was an insane comeback. And what's insane is that other than this overtime game, every single game, I should point on this side, every single game was a blowout. On the score sheet, they were all blowouts. 2014, the New York Rangers made me happy by coming back against Pittsburgh. The Rangers won 3-2 in overtime in Game 1 in Pittsburgh. Then Pittsburgh wins 3-0. Then Pittsburgh wins 2-0. So back-to-back shutouts. And then Pittsburgh got the 4-2 win in Game 4, and this one was done. But the Rangers win 5-1 in Game 5 in Pittsburgh. Game 6, New York Rangers win at home 3-1, and then the Rangers eke out a 2-1 win in Pittsburgh in Game 7. 2015, the last time this has happened. So we didn't see one last year. We didn't see one the year before. Maybe we see one this year, and maybe this board gets filled up a little bit more by the end of the playoffs. But the Rangers came back the year after, a 3-1 series lead. Against who? The Capitals. Washington wins Game 1 on the road, 2-1. The Rangers win Game 2, 3-2. Washington holds serve at home, 1-0 and 2-1 victories there, so low scoring, low chances. But Washington's defense was better. It's funny, the Washington Capitals have really evolved over the last 10 years, and every year it seems like they're trying to evolve their game to have a playoff game, a playoff style, and it just, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to work. Game 3 and 4, like I said, they win them 1-0 and 2-1. This is playoff hockey. Game 5 in New York, 2-1 win in overtime for the Rangers. I was kind of heartbroken a little bit there. But again, with the Caps, I don't tend to get my hopes up because look at the board. Game 6, the Rangers win at home 4-3, and then Washington does what they do. Or no, Rangers won on the road 4-3, and then the Capitals did what they do. They lost in overtime in 2015. Game 7 in New York, 2-1 overtime. And there you go. Every single 3-1 comeback. And what happened? And this is why when a series is 3-1 and we're all like, well, this series is over. Sometimes it's not. This is a lot of, but again, it hasn't happened for 2 years. We're due. We are due for a 3-1 comeback. And you'll notice that there are numerous times where the team that's up 3-1 and loses is the team that's statistically better during the season. So having home ice in Game 7 is not always an advantage in these situations. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and this got way out of control and got way longer than I'd expected it to. That's what he said. Thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.